The castle stood defiantly, anachronistic amid the glass and steel monoliths of downtown. Most people walked past without a second glance, their eyes sliding over the ancient stonework, as if it were just another corporate headquarters. The occasional tourist might pause, squint at it in confusion, then check their map app before moving on. That was the nature of the castle. It existed in plain sight, yet somehow remained unseen. A peculiar blind spot in the collective consciousness of the city. Jax Mercer knew better. As he approached the service entrance on his electric scooter, helmet askew and delivery bag slung across his back, he was one of the few who could actually see the true nature of the building. The doorway recognized him. Stones shifting to form an archway, where seconds before there had been only flat wall. The sensation never failed to unnerve him, despite having made deliveries here for nearly 6 months. Just another Tuesday, he muttered to himself, running a hand through his perpetually tousled dark hair. At 28, Jax had the weary demeanor of someone who had cycled through a dozen different career paths without finding his calling. His current job as a courier for the Celestial Dragon Fortress Company paid the bills and offered excellent health insurance, which was more than could be said for his previous stint as a would-be novelist or his brief, disastrous foray into cryptocurrency trading. His apartment was small but comfortable, shared with a peculiar pet, a creature that resembled a cross between a salamander and a miniature peacock. The thing had followed him home one rainy night after a delivery to the castle's west wing. After failing to identify it through any zoological database, Jax had named it Inkblot and accepted its presence as yet another inexplicable element in his increasingly odd life. Jax's phone buzzed. The message was succinct. "Urgent summons. Report to the North Tower immediately." He frowned. This was unusual. His typical duties involved delivering packages, messages, and occasionally strange artifacts to different departments within the castle. Direct summons were rare, especially to the North Tower, which housed the administrative offices of the more esoteric branches of the company. After passing through 3 security checkpoints, each more peculiar than the last, the second required him to whisper a secret he'd never told anyone. The third asked him to temporarily surrender his shadow. Jax found himself in a circular room at the top of the North Tower. The ceiling arched impossibly high above, painted with constellations that moved subtly when not directly observed. "Jax Mercer," a voice announced, neither male nor female, emanating from everywhere and nowhere at once. "Your service record has been reviewed. You have been selected." A figure stepped out from behind a curved desk of polished obsidian. Tall and elegant, dressed in robes that seemed to shift between deep purple and midnight blue. The being had skin the color of burnished bronze and eyes that reflected starlight. A nameplate on the desk identified them as May Ambassador. "Selected for what, exactly?" Jax asked, shifting uncomfortably from one foot to another. The May Ambassador regarded him with those unsettling stellar eyes. "Our Dragon Keeper has departed unexpectedly. We require an immediate replacement. You have been chosen." Jax blinked. "I deliver packages. I don't know anything about keeping dragons?" The last word came out as a question, though he'd heard rumors about what lay in the deepest chambers beneath the castle. "You will learn," the ambassador replied with finality. "The position is temporary but of the utmost importance. One job. Jax Mercer, feed the dragons. Nothing more, nothing less. And if I refuse?" The ambassador's expression didn't change, but the temperature in the room dropped noticeably. "That would be most unfortunate. For everyone." 20 minutes later, Jax found himself descending in an elevator that seemed to fall for much longer than should have been possible given the height of the castle. The May Ambassador accompanied him, silent and statuesque. When the doors finally slid open, they revealed a vast chamber hewn from ancient stone, illuminated by strange glowing crystals embedded in the walls. At the center of the room stood an immense machine, a complex arrangement of gears, pistons, and crystalline components that pulsed with energy. "This is the heart chamber," the ambassador explained. "The dragons maintain the celestial engine, which in turn maintains certain aspects of reality." "What aspects?" Jax asked. "All of them," came the cryptic reply. 3 massive enclosures extended from the central chamber, each sealed with doors of different materials. The first appeared to be made of clockwork and glass, constantly shifting and reforming. The second glowed with barely contained energy, while the third seemed to be a void, a perfect absence of matter. "Time, energy, and void," the ambassador explained, following Jax's gaze. 3 dragons, 3 fundamental forces. They must be fed precisely according to schedule and formula. The previous keeper left detailed instructions. The ambassador handed Jax a worn, leather-bound journal. "This contains everything you need to know. The feeding schedule, the recipes, the protocols. Follow them exactly. The consequences of failure are significant." "How significant are we talking about?" Jax asked, leafing through the journal with growing apprehension. "Local reality disruption at minimum. Total universal collapse at worst." The ambassador's tone remained conversational. "The dragon's diet stabilizes their connection to the engine. Without proper feeding, their energies become erratic." Jax swallowed hard. "When do I start?" "Now," said the ambassador, gesturing to a nearby door. "Those are your quarters. The kitchen is through there. First feeding is in 3 hours. The time dragon always eats first." With that, the ambassador returned to the elevator and was gone, leaving Jax alone in the vast chamber with only the hum of the celestial engine and the weight of his new responsibility for company. The kitchen, as it turned out, was unlike any Jax had ever seen. While it contained familiar elements, countertops, sinks, storage areas, it also featured equipment he couldn't begin to identify. Strange alchemical apparatus stood alongside what appeared to be a miniature particle accelerator. One wall was entirely occupied by a pantry filled with ingredients labeled in languages he couldn't read, and several that appeared to be written in patterns of light rather than actual characters. Jax opened the journal and began to read. According to the notes left by his predecessor, each dragon required a specialized diet that corresponded to its nature. The preparations were complex, involving not just physical ingredients, but elements like distilled memories, compressed time, and potential energies. The first entry detailed the feeding process for the time dragon. Time dragon diet requires balance of past and future elements. Base broth must include 3 liters of mineral water from springs older than human civilization, essence of redwood tree growth rings, minimum 2,000 years, extract of geological strata, preferably Cambrian period, 2 drops quantum uncertainty solution, memories of childhood, preferably your own, but store-bought, acceptable if fresh. Combine ingredients in chronological order, oldest to newest. Heat until just before boiling point. Never allow to actually boil. This will cause temporal displacement of kitchen and possibly adjacent realities. Jax ran a hand over his face. "This is insane," he muttered, but began searching the pantry nonetheless. To his surprise, every ingredient listed was present, meticulously labeled and organized. The memories of childhood turned out to be contained in small crystal vials, each glowing with a soft blue light. Following the instructions as precisely as possible, Jax began preparing the time dragon's meal. The process was exacting and, at times, seemingly impossible. How exactly does one stir Widdershins relative to the Earth's rotation? But the journal provided detailed guidance, and 3 hours later, Jax stood before a cauldron of swirling, opalescent liquid that seemed to simultaneously flow forward and backward. According to the journal, The final step was to pour the mixture into a specially designed feeding vessel and place it in the antechamber of the time dragon's enclosure. Under no circumstances was he to enter the main chamber or attempt direct contact with the dragon. The feeding vessel was made of crystal that branched and looped back on itself in impossible ways. As Jax carefully poured the mixture into it, he noticed that the liquid sometimes reached parts of the vessel before he had poured it, while in other sections it arrived with a noticeable delay. The antechamber to the time dragon's enclosure was a small room with walls of shifting clockwork. A pedestal stood at its center, clearly designed to hold the feeding vessel. Jax placed the vessel on the pedestal and quickly retreated as instructed. Through a small viewing window, he observed as the pedestal rotated and sank into the floor, presumably delivering the meal to the dragon beyond. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the entire chamber began to vibrate subtly. The clockwork walls spun faster, and Jax felt a strange sensation, as if he were experiencing the same moment repeatedly, each iteration slightly different. It was disorienting, but not entirely unpleasant. The vibration subsided, and a small light above the door turned from red to green. According to the journal, this indicated successful feeding. 1 down, 2 to go. The energy dragon's meal was even more complex, involving what the journal called potential energies and speculative forces. The ingredients included sunlight captured at dawn, the potential energy of a suspended weight, and, most bizarrely, the excitement of a child on Christmas Eve. This last component came in a vial labeled anticipatory emotional energy, and when Jax uncorked it, the air around him briefly crackled with electricity, and his heart raced with unexplained excitement. The preparation involved a contraption that resembled a miniature particle accelerator, which Jax had to calibrate according to complex formulas provided in the journal. When activated, the device emitted a high-pitched whine and caused all the hair on Jax's body to stand on end. The resulting mixture glowed with barely contained power, shifting between all visible colors and several that Jax was quite certain he'd never seen before. The feeding vessel for this meal was made of a metal that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, and it hummed in his hands as he carried it to the energy dragon's antechamber. This chamber was lined with what appeared to be lightning rods and insulating materials. The pedestal here was surrounded by a containment field that Jax had to temporarily deactivate, using a complex sequence of buttons and levers to place the vessel. The feeding process caused the entire heart chamber to momentarily brighten, as if all the ambient energy in the air had been amplified. Jax felt simultaneously exhausted and invigorated, as if he'd just run a marathon and consumed 10 espressos. The final meal, for the Void Dragon, was perhaps the strangest. The journal described it as anti-cuisine, the preparation of nothing. Quite literally, the recipe called for the absence of light, the space between thoughts, and the silence between heartbeats. Jax found himself standing in a specially designed area of the kitchen, using tools that seemed designed to remove rather than add, a device that extracted light from a room, leaving perfect darkness behind, another that somehow captured the pauses in his own thought processes, storing them in a container that appeared both empty and full at the same time. The resulting meal was a perfect absence, a bowl that contained nothing, not even empty space. Looking at it made Jax's eyes hurt and his mind spin. The feeding vessel wasn't a vessel at all, but rather a frame that defined an area without actually enclosing anything. The Void Dragon's antechamber was the most unsettling of all, a space that seemed to actively resist being perceived or remembered. Jax found himself having to concentrate just to remember why he was there and what he was doing. The pedestal was a negative space, defined only by what wasn't there. When the meal was delivered, Jax experienced a moment of perfect emptiness, a second in which he ceased to exist, or perhaps existed everywhere at once. It was over before he could properly process it, leaving only a lingering sense of vastness and a mild headache. With all three dragons fed, Jax returned to his quarters, exhausted both physically and mentally. The journal indicated that the feeding schedule varied. The time dragon required feeding every 37 hours, a prime number, apparently significant. The energy dragon every 24 hours, and the void dragon only once every 7 days, during what was ominously termed the hour of unmaking. The quarters were surprisingly comfortable, with a bed, bathroom, small living area, and even an entertainment system that somehow received streaming services despite being what felt like miles underground. Jax collapsed onto the bed, his mind racing with questions and concerns. What had happened to the previous Dragon Keeper? How long would this temporary assignment last? And most pressingly, what exactly were these dragons? And what did they have to do with maintaining reality? Sleep eventually claimed him, but his dreams were filled with visions of cosmic machinery and vast, incomprehensible beings that existed between the ticks of a clock, in the transfer of energy, and in the spaces where nothing should be. The next week passed in a blur of increasingly complex feedings and gradual adaptation to his new role. Jax developed a routine, studying the journal between feedings to better understand the intricate science-magic hybrid that governed the dragon's diets. He discovered notes in the margins, little observations and adjustments made by previous keepers. There had been many, it seemed, dating back centuries. One feeding, however, went disastrously wrong. While preparing the time dragon's meal, Jax accidentally added the quantum uncertainty solution before rather than after the geological extract. The reaction was immediate and alarming. The mixture began to age and de-age rapidly, the cauldron itself warping as it became both ancient and brand new simultaneously. Temporal distortions rippled outward. In his quarters, the entertainment system began showing programs from decades past and yet to be made future seasons simultaneously. A potted plant by the window cycled through sprouting, flowering, wilting, and regenerating in seconds. The May ambassador appeared almost instantly, materializing rather than arriving by elevator. Their expression was thunderous. "What have you done?" they demanded, voice resonating with barely contained power. I made a mistake with the sequence," Jax admitted, desperately trying to stabilize the mixture according to emergency protocols outlined in the journal. "Sequence is everything with temporal cuisine," the ambassador snapped, waves of chronological distortion making their form waver between youth, maturity, and age. With efficient movements, they took over the process, adding counteragents and reciting incantations that made reality shiver. Gradually, the distortions subsided. The ambassador fixed Jax with a stern gaze. "The time dragon will be irritable now. Its meal will be like eating food with the flavors all wrong. This affects the celestial engine's temporal regulation capacities. Already I've received reports of déjà vu incidents, spiking across 17 adjacent realities." "I'm sorry," Jax said, genuinely contrite. "It won't happen again." "See that it doesn't. The margins for error in this position are narrow." Jax Mercer, extraordinarily narrow. After the ambassador departed, Jax threw himself into studying the journal with renewed determination. It was during this intensive review that he noticed something odd. Hidden beneath the formal recipes and procedures were personal notes from the previous keeper, written in a different ink and often in the form of coded references. When decoded, using a cipher, Jax found in the back of the journal. These notes revealed an entirely different perspective on dragon feeding. Official protocol is foundation, not limitation. Dragons respond to innovation. The engine requires balance but grows through controlled disruption. Management upstairs too rigid, stuck in patterns thousands of years old. Have been experimenting with new elements and feeds. Results promising. Intrigued, Jax began examining the more recent entries, which detailed experimental additions to the standard recipes. The previous keeper had introduced concepts like fermented possibilities, crystallized contradictions, and most intriguingly, future moments. This last element particularly caught Jax's attention. According to the notes, the keeper had been capturing moments that had not yet happened and incorporating them into the dragon's diets with remarkable results. The process for doing so was outlined in a section written in particularly cryptic language, apparently to hide it from the ambassador and whatever management referred to. After several days of careful study and preparation, Jax decided to attempt incorporating a future moment into the time dragon's next meal. The process was complex, involving a device hidden behind a false panel in the kitchen that the notes called a possibility extractor. It resembled a silver helmet connected to a crystalline container. Following the instructions, Jax placed the helmet on his head and focused on imagining a specific future moment. He chose the simple act of watching the sunset from the castle's highest tower, something he hadn't yet done but could reasonably expect to experience. The device hummed, and Jax felt a curious sensation, as if that potential experience was being gently pulled from his mind. When he removed the helmet, the crystal container held a swirling mist of golden-orange light. With equal parts excitement and trepidation, Jax incorporated this future moment into the time dragon's standard meal. When he delivered it to the antechamber, the response was immediate and dramatic. The clockwork walls spun with unprecedented speed, and through the viewing window, Jax caught a fleeting glimpse of something vast and serpentine, its scales like segments of time itself, shimmering through past, present, and future simultaneously. The light above the door didn't merely turn green. It pulsed with rainbow hues before settling on a deeper, richer green than Jax had ever seen before. The journal had mentioned nothing about this response. Over the next several feedings, Jax gradually introduced similar innovations to each dragon's diet. The energy dragon received potential actions, energy captured from things that might happen but hadn't yet. The void dragon's meal was most challenging to modify, but Jax eventually succeeded in incorporating what the journal cryptically called the concept of future absence. Essentially, spaces that would exist in the future, but did not yet. Each feeding brought increasingly dramatic responses from the dragons and subtle changes to the celestial engine. Its hum took on new harmonics, and the crystalline components pulsed with greater vibrancy. Jax began to notice changes in his perception as well, occasional moments when he could sense the flow of time as a tangible current, or perceive energy as visible auras around objects, or understand emptiness not as nothing, but as a rich, complex state of potential. The May ambassador, during their infrequent check-ins, seemed both puzzled and intrigued by these developments. The engine's efficiency has increased 7%, they noted during one visit. Unexplained, but not unwelcome. Continue your work, Keeper. Jax didn't mention his deviations from the standard protocols. Then came the seventh day, and with it, the hour of unmaking, the Void Dragon's special feeding time. According to both the official protocol and the hidden notes, this was the most crucial and dangerous feeding of all. The Void Dragon consumed only once a week, but that consumption had profound implications for the balance of existence and non-existence. The official recipe called for an elaborate null meal, a complex absence created through dozens of precise extractions and removals. But the previous keeper's notes suggested a radical alternative. For seventh-day feeding, tried simplest approach, pure conceptual nothingness. Not absence of things, but the concept of nothingness itself. Dragon responded extraordinarily. Engine recalibration unprecedented. Warning: management extremely sensitive about void modifications. Proceed with utmost caution. Jax stood in the kitchen, torn between following the official protocol and attempting this simpler, yet apparently more effective approach. The decision was momentous. He would be tinkering with fundamental aspects of reality based on cryptic notes from a predecessor who was no longer present and whose fate remained unknown. After hours of deliberation, Jax made his choice. Instead of the elaborate null meal, he prepared a simple bowl, not empty, but containing only the pure concept of nothingness. The preparation was less about adding or removing ingredients, and more about a form of meditation, focusing his mind on the absolute essence of non-being. When completed, the result was unsettling. A bowl that seemed to contain a perfect void, more absolute than mere emptiness. Looking at it was like staring into a hole in reality itself. With trembling hands, Jax carried this conceptual nothingness to the Void Dragon's antechamber. As he placed it on the negative space pedestal, he felt a moment of doubt. Was he making a terrible mistake? Too late to reconsider. The pedestal descended, delivering his offering to the Void Dragon. For a moment, nothing happened. Then everything happened at once. The entire heart chamber shuddered violently. The celestial engine's hum rose to a roar, its components spinning and pulsing with unprecedented intensity. All three dragon enclosures began to glow, clockwork, energy, and void all activated simultaneously. Jax was thrown to the floor as reality itself seemed to warp around him. Through the viewing window, he saw something impossible, the Void Dragon emerging from its enclosure. Not physically, but as a presence that somehow occupied the space without displacing anything within it. A dragon-shaped absence that was paradoxically more present than anything else in the room. The other enclosures opened as well, revealing the Time Dragon, a serpentine being composed of ticking clockwork and flowing temporal currents, and the Energy Dragon, a creature of pure power, its form constantly shifting between states of matter and energy. Most alarmingly, Jax realized that the dragons were still chained to the engine, but the chains were not restraints, they were conduits. The dragons weren't prisoners, they were components, willingly connected to the machine that they powered through their existence. The May ambassador burst into the chamber, accompanied by several figures in elaborate robes, bearing insignias of cosmic authority. "What have you done?" the ambassador demanded, voice barely audible over the engine's roar. Before Jax could respond, the chamber filled with light, or perhaps the absence of light, or light from another time. Communication became possible on a level beyond words. The dragons were speaking, not to Jax or the ambassador, but to each other, and somehow Jax could understand. The cycle progresses ahead of schedule. The Time Dragon's voice reverberated through past and future. The new keeper brings change, beneficial disruption. The Energy Dragon's words came as pulses of pure power. Nothing is as it was. Nothing is as it will be. This is correct. The Void. Dragon's communication was an absence that conveyed meaning. The May ambassador stepped forward. Exalted ones, the feeding protocol has been violated. The Immutable Council has detected fluctuations across multiple realities. Stability is threatened. Stability is stagnation, replied the Time Dragon. Controlled chaos drives evolution, added the Energy Dragon. The absence of change is true void, not the presence of nothing, concluded the Void Dragon. Jax finally found his voice. What's happening? What are they talking about? The ambassador turned to him, expression unreadable. They're discussing cosmic cycles. The dragons don't merely maintain reality. They guide its evolution through carefully managed chaos. But the balance is delicate. Too much stability prevents growth. Too much chaos brings destruction. One of the robed figures stepped forward, radiating authority. I am Principal Counselor of the Immutable Council. Your unauthorized modifications to the feeding protocols have accelerated reality fluctuations beyond acceptable parameters. The dragons must be contained and reality patterns restored to standard variation levels. The dragons' reactions were immediate and unified. The engine roared louder, and the chains connecting them to it glowed with increasing intensity. "Premature intervention," stated the time dragon. "Potential unrealized," pulsed the energy dragon. "Absence of vision," resonated the void dragon. Jax suddenly understood what was happening. The immutable council represented cosmic bureaucracy, order, stability, predictability. The dragons and the engine they powered introduced necessary chaos into reality, allowing for evolution and growth. His modifications to their diet had accelerated this process, threatening the council's careful schedules and plans. In that moment of clarity, Jax made a decision. He ran to the kitchen, ignoring the shouts of the ambassador and the council members, working with frantic speed. He prepared a new meal, not for any single dragon, but for all three simultaneously. The recipe came to him instinctively, drawing on everything he'd learned from the journal and his own experiments. A mixture of time, energy, and void, past and future, being and non-being, all balanced in perfect harmony, yet containing the seeds of beautiful chaos. When he returned to the heart chamber, the situation had deteriorated. Council members were activating devices that seemed designed to suppress the dragon's influence, while the ambassador argued vehemently against their actions. The dragons themselves had grown more substantial, their forms more defined as they strained against their connections to the engine. "Stop!" Jax shouted, holding aloft the vessel containing his new creation. "This isn't about control or chaos, it's about balance." All eyes turned to him. The principal counselor's expression darkened. "Restrain him. The feeding protocols must be restored to standard parameters." "Wait," the ambassador intervened. "Let him speak. The dragons are responding to him." Indeed, all three great beings had turned their attention to Jax and the mixture he held. They seemed to be waiting, expectant. "The previous keeper understood something fundamental," Jax explained, choosing his words carefully. "The dragons don't just maintain reality, they improve it. They introduce necessary disruption that allows for growth and evolution. Your standard protocols were limiting their ability to do this effectively." "Unacceptable," the principal counselor declared. "Cosmic evolution proceeds according to the grand schedule. Deviations are necessary," Jax interrupted. "Life doesn't evolve on a schedule. Neither should reality." Without waiting for permission, Jax approached the engine's central interface, a point where all three dragons' chains converged. Following an intuition he couldn't explain, he poured his mixture directly into this nexus. The effect was immediate and overwhelming. The engine's roar became a harmonic chorus. The dragon's form stabilized, becoming fully visible, yet still impossible to comprehend in their entirety. The chains pulsed with energy that flowed not just from the dragons to the engine, but in a continuous circuit. Reality rippled outward from the heart chamber. Jax experienced a moment of perfect clarity. He could see the flows of time, the currents of energy, the spaces between existence. He understood, if only for an instant, how it all fit together. When the moment passed and his perception returned to normal, the chamber had changed. The engine still hummed, but with a richer, more complex harmony. The dragons had returned to their enclosures, but the doors stood open. The immutable council members looked shaken, their certainty visibly diminished. The May ambassador was the first to speak. "The celestial engine has recalibrated. Reality parameters have expanded." The principal counselor examined readings on a device that hadn't been in their hand a moment before. "Impossible," they muttered. "Stability maintained, but with increased complexity. Chaos contained, but not eliminated." They looked at Jax with new respect. "What do you call this feeding method?" Jax considered for a moment. "Balanced chaos," he said simply. In the days that followed, a new equilibrium was established. The immutable council, while not entirely convinced, agreed to a period of observation rather than immediate intervention. The dragons settled into a new feeding routine that incorporated elements of both the traditional protocols and Jax's innovations. The May ambassador officially appointed Jax as the permanent dragon keeper, with expanded authority to continue his research and refinements. The previous keeper would be proud, the ambassador told him during the formal appointment ceremony. They believed, as you do, that the universe thrives on the right kind of chaos. What happened to them? Jax finally asked the question that had been bothering him since his first day. The ambassador's expression softened slightly. They ascended. After centuries of service, they became something more, neither human nor dragon, but a new kind of cosmic entity. It happens, occasionally, to those who truly understand the nature of the engine and its purpose. Jax thought about this as he returned to the heart chamber. Now his domain in a way it hadn't been before. The dragons greeted him in their own ways, a ripple of time, a pulse of energy, a meaningful absence. He had come to understand them better over the weeks. They weren't gods or monsters, but fundamental aspects of reality given form and consciousness. They chose to connect themselves to the engine, to channel their inherent natures into the maintenance and evolution of existence. The time dragon ensured that past flowed to present to future in the right way, not as a rigid progression, but as a fluid continuum that allowed for meaningful change while preserving causality. The energy dragon maintained the delicate balance of forces, ensuring that stars burned, that life had the power to grow and change, that thought itself could emerge from complex systems of matter. The void dragon was perhaps the most crucial and least understood. It created space for existence, defined boundaries, and ensured that nothingness remained a potential from which somethingness could always emerge anew. Together, they didn't just maintain reality, they nurtured it, like gardeners tending a cosmic ecosystem. And Jax? He was their chef, creating meals that nourished their connection to the engine and to existence itself. Each feeding was an opportunity for innovation, for introducing new elements that might cascade through reality in subtle but profound ways. As he prepared the next day's meals, a temporal soufflé for the time dragon, an energetic reduction for the energy dragon, and, for the void dragon, a perfect absence garnished with future potential. Jax reflected on how dramatically his life had changed, from a disillusioned delivery person to the keeper of cosmic forces, all because he'd been willing to question protocols and take creative risks. The engine hummed its complex harmony. The dragons existed in their paradoxical states, and throughout countless realities, existence continued its messy, beautiful evolution, nourished by the meals prepared in a kitchen beyond time, energy, and void, by a chef who had started with just one job: feed the dragons. No one, least of all Jax himself, could have expected what he would serve them, or how those meals would change everything.